Hi everyone, Deb Tucker here from Studio 180 Design. Today's video is going to deal with one of our technique sheets that we've developed for our Star 60 tool. And we call this technique Checkerboard 60. And when you look at a unit, it's very easy to see why we call it a checkerboard, because the diamond section of the Star 60 unit is actually divided into 4 smaller diamonds. We're going to do this with strip piecing, and I'm going to walk you through the process. So before you begin, you're going to need to make sure you have your Star 60 tool, and we always recommend that you take a few minutes and be familiar with the tool and the basic instructions that came with it before you jump into something that's a little more advanced. You're also going to need the Checkerboard 60 technique sheet, and this is going to give you a whole bunch of different sizes from fairly small to fairly large. And your first decision, as always, is to decide what size unit you would like to make. For this video, I'm going to be making 6-inch finished units. One of the things that I like to do on my technique sheet is highlight the line that I need to be looking at for the numbers that I need throughout the course of the construction. Once you've decided what size you want to make, the next decision is going to be what colors you're going to use. You're going to basically need to cut a strip for each section. You're going to need to cut one strip for what's going to be your inner diamond. You're going to need to cut one strip that will be for your outer diamond, and you're going to need to cut 2 strips for those middle diamonds. You're also going to need strips of fabric for the side triangles, and those are cut the same way as in the basic set of instructions. Once your strips are cut, what you're going to do is put them together in pairs, stitch them together, and you're going to make strip sets. One of the strip sets will consist of a middle diamond strip plus the outer point, and the other strip set will consist of the middle diamond strip plus the inner diamond. And we suggest that you stagger those starts just a little bit. And this distance is about half the width of the strip. So this is a 2 1/4 inch strip for my 6-inch size. So I move those strips down about 1 1/4 inches. That's about half the distance. And I'm going to stitch those together using a good 1/4 inch seam. And then once that's stitched, what you're going to want to do are press those seams open. Pressing open is going to allow those seams to be nice and flat when you build your diamond. And you can see the stagger here, but what we're going to do after you press your strips is we're actually going to layer them together and cut them at the same time. If you are right-handed, what you'll be doing is putting the strips wrong side up on your cutting mat. You're going to be layering them one on top of the other. Now I've already started this one. This actually, you can kind of see where the stagger was. The stagger was here, and so I'm setting it up like this. And you have a graphic of this in the technique sheet. But you're going to set it up like this. Take some time to line those edges up carefully. I often will press those together so that they stay together a little bit, and then I'm going to make a 60-degree angle cut. Now, I am right-handed, so I started that cut. I made that 60-degree angle cut on the left-hand side so that I can move from left to right. If you happen to be left-handed, what you're going to do is flip those strips over so that they are right side up, and you'll actually set up your 60-degree cut going in this direction so that once you get that initial cut down, it's going to be comfortable for you to make the next subcuts. Now I can show you how to do that, but I've got to go back to my right-handed in order to demonstrate the subcuts. So my strips are layered. I made a 60-degree angle cut here. There's an easy way to do that, and I'm going to, again, place these here so you can kind of see. I can either take the tool like this and make a cut along one edge of the tool, or like we do in so many of our other techniques, take the line on the tool, or the edge of the tool and place that along the seam line so that I'm easily setting up that 60-degree angle. Now I'm going to go ahead and shave a little bit more off of this because I've moved those strips. So I'm going to line that up like that, remove the star 60 tool, make my 60-degree cut. Now I'm not going to use the star 60 to do the subcuts. I want to make these subcuts the same measurement as the width of the strips. I cut these strips 2 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to do is make subcuts. And to make one of the hexagons that you see behind me, I'm going to need a total of 6 cuts. And I'm going to make those cuts by placing the 2 1/4 inch line right along the raw edge that I just cut. If you have a tool, a regular ruler, that has a 60-degree line on it, place that 60-degree line on the seam. That's going to help to ensure that you're staying at the correct angle when you make those subcuts. Once I have the first one, I'll simply slide it down, double check if you have a marker that you like to put on your ruler at 2 1/4 to make sure that you're at the same 2 1/4 inch line along that cut that you just made so that you're making those subcuts down along. And so then you have the shapes that you need to create your diamond. So once you have your subcuts, the next step will be to stitch them together. Now, this is something that I always do. Once I have my subcuts, I take them to my sewing machine, and beside my stitching area, I arrange them in stacks exactly like I want to sew them together. Because you can take these and you can arrange them a bunch of different ways. No, that's not what I want. Yes, that's what I want. Now there are other arrangements too. You can take them and arrange them like this and end up with your 2 colors on the side. So it's easy to get these kind of misshapen. But what I want to do is lay them out, and I would put 6 on this pile and 6 on this pile so they all look exactly like I want them to look in my finished unit. Once I have that, I'm going to take note of which 2 edges are going to be sewn together. And I'm going to mark those 2 edges. And I'm big on using the friction pens. And when I do that, what I'm going to do is on one of the subcuts and on the side that needs to be marked, I'm going to mark actually on the right side of the fabric. Now, don't do this if you're using a Pigma pen or you're using a pencil, because those lines might not come out. But with the friction pen, the nice thing about marking that on the front side is as soon as I press it, it disappears. So that one I actually put on the front side. On the opposite section, what I do is flip it over. Now I'm paying attention which one needs to be marked. It's this side, and I'm going to mark that. These match points, these 1/4 inch future sewing marks, are going to allow you to easily pin these sections together. Take a pin, go through the seam and the match point, and then on this side, go through the seam and the match point. This is going to help you to align 2 seams. The bottom one's going in one direction, the top one's going in the other direction, but you want them to meet. And once I put that positioning pin in, then what I'll do is take an anchor pin. And I won't shift this first pin because locking that down will sometimes cause a distortion in your alignment. What I'm going to do is take an anchor pin. The anchor pin will hold it so that when I'm stitching then, I can simply remove that, stitch right through that line, and end up with pieces that match beautifully in the center. Now this is what you want. You want a very good match between the 2 seams. What you want to avoid is a mismatched seam in the middle, because it's going to cause problems throughout the rest of your construction if those seams don't match, because you're not going to know how and where to trim and place the guidelines on to trim your unit to size. So once you have your diamond units, The next step is going to be to trim the diamond that will become the outer point. And you want to keep this straight in your mind and realize that you can mix and match these, you know, and I'll talk about that later. But for my purposes, I'm going to always make the assumption that my pink is the outer point on my star 60 unit. And when I go to trim that, there's one more thing that I do before I trim it down with my star 60 tool. And that's to take a minute, turn my star 60 tool over, and mark 2 extension lines from the size that I need. Now I'm making a 6-inch unit, but when I consult the chart on my technique sheet, it tells me that my guidelines need to be drawn at the 3-inch increment. So I've taken on the back of my tool that's been covered with the Invisigrip, so I'm not actually marking on the tool, I'm marking on the plastic, and I've extended the lines for the 3-inch. That's going to help me when I go to trim this down, because not only will I have those diamond star guidelines to go on one diamond, but it's like a great big X marking the spot that's going to go right over the seams that you've just sewn. So I'm going to take them off a little bit so you can kind of see where they are, place them right over top, and now you can see why it's important to have those seams match, otherwise you don't know where to put these lines. Once I've lined them up, as a right-hander I'm tipped a little bit to the right so that I can come up here and trim like this, both sides, to get rid of that. If you happen to be a left-hander, instead of tipping your unit to point to the right, simply tip your unit so it points to the left, line up those same guidelines, and then trim your shape left-handed. After you've trimmed all of the outer points of the diamonds, the next thing is to build your star 60 unit. And you're going to need 2 of those side triangles for each diamond that you produce, each star 60 unit that you produce. And I always, and we always tell you in the instructions for our patterns and our technique sheet and our tool to be consistent with this step. Add the right triangle first. It's going to help to develop a process so that all your seams will nest going forward. So what I'm going to do is I'd lay a stack. I'd put 6 of those here. I'd put 6 in this pile and 6 in this pile. I'd move those off to the side, and when I go to stitch, what I'm going to do is place that side triangle on top. And you know, there's a little nub there. That's the perfect thing to put on the side of the diamond for matching. But when you stitch, flip this unit over and stitch with the diamond on top so that you're stitching down in this direction. So once you have that stitched, what you're going to want to do is press this seam so that it goes toward the diamond. Now it doesn't really want to go that way because there's a seam here. But remember, you're in charge. You're the boss. You're going to say that this seam needs to go in this direction, because the process of always adding the right triangle and pressing the seams the way we're talking about will cause all your seams to nest when you create your hexagon shapes. So I'm pressing in this direction. The next thing that I'm going to do is take the triangle from the left, place it over top of the pressed unit, and stitch that in the same manner. Now, one of the things that I always do is I'm always big on chain piecing. So don't feel like you need to construct these one at a time, first the right and then the left. When I went to add my left side triangles, I stitched them chain piecing. And there's one other thing I want you to think about. Because I have a very light fabric right here and I have a fairly dark fabric as one of my diamonds, when I press that back, if I don't take the time to trim that dog ear, and I would do it when I'm at my ironing board after the stitching is done, but get rid of that little pop of color there so that it's not shadowing through when you create your quilts and your blocks down the way. So once you have your units produced and pressed, the next step is to trim the star 60 unit down to a precision size. So I'm going to use those 3-inch guidelines, place those on the sewn seam lines, but I also have the addition of the unit diamond guidelines. I'm making a 6-inch size, so I can use those diamond 6 guidelines at the 6 on the outside seams. I've got the X's on the inside seam, so that when I go to trim that inner tip down, I'm going to have a perfect shape on the tip of the star 60 unit. I still have fabric on the base of the unit. And to trim the base, sometimes I would do that after I constructed a block and trim at the end, but let me show you how I would trim that base if I needed this to be the precision size. What I'm going to do is use the flat edge trim lines that are on the end of the tool, place those flat edge trim lines, and this is all in the basic set of instructions. So again, familiarity with the basics will help you with this. But when I add those flat edge trim lines on the seam, double check to make sure that center guideline goes right through the center of your unit. You make that trim, you are going to have a perfectly sized unit that's going to give you a much better block because you've trimmed it after it's done. And this process that I just showed you here for the trimming will work on all of the checkerboard 60 units that go up to 9 inches. But once that gets above 9 inches, the star 60 tool is too small. Give me a minute and I'll set up and show you how to cut something that's larger than a 9-inch checkerboard unit. So here I've constructed a unit that is actually going to finish to 16 inches. The lines that I need to focus on for my trimming are the 8-inch guidelines. And if you haven't made that connection yet, the guidelines are actually half of the finished size of the unit. So this is too large for my tool to be able to cut all the way to the end of the unit. So I'm going to look at the 8-inch diamond guidelines that are on the tool, and I'm going to place those 8-inch guidelines here and here on the seam. Now you can extend those if you want to, but there's not very much beyond. Usually those bigger sizes, that's enough. But rather than just trimming along the edge of the triangle, I'm going to use a longer tool, and I will place the tool along the edge of the triangle, remove the star 60 tool, and then make my cut on this side. And it works best if you're right-handed to have the tip away from you, do the left side, then rotate your unit so that you've got the 8-inch that can go back on the same seam lines, place this here so that I can then trim on the side that's comfortable for me as a right-hander. If you are a left-hander, and there are illustrations on this on the technique sheet, as a left-hander, what you would do with the point, the tip coming at you, take your long ruler and place it on the right-hand side so that when you remove the tool, you can comfortably cut left-handed. And you're going to need to do this on that flat edge too. When it comes to the flat edge and you've got a big shape, use the guidelines that are on the star 60 tool. They're still there and they're still important and they're still what we're focusing on. So I put those flat edge trim lines there, but I don't have enough ruler with my star 60 to trim those bigger ones. And I'm going to need a 24-inch ruler here to be able to extend that all the way across, but place that there. And of course, I realize now that I'd have to tip this a little bit, but you kind of get the idea. Teaming up the rulers, a longer one, plus your star 60 for alignment is going to give you the opportunity to make really big projects. And you know, that's one of the fun things about Studio 180 Design tools. Not only can you make big projects, but you can also, with the same tool, with the same technique sheet, create This is a 3-inch finished unit. How cool is that? You're not having to buy a different set of templates every time you want to make that. And you know, one of the other things that we like to do at Studio 180 is come up with interesting techniques, but then play with those techniques. You know, this one was kind of what we were making today, but you can take those and you can arrange them differently. Remember, I was talking a little bit about arranging the diamonds? Here I used just the red and yellows, and the darks are coming out from the center. Here I used just the blue and the yellow, and they're going, so it's a different look. Now this one is the Checkerboard 60 teamed up with a regular star 60. And you know, the border strip up that you see up there, it's simply the same units that we did. One of them is trimmed with the red being the outer point. One of them is trimmed with the blue being the outer point, and when you team them up, you get a look like this. So think about this, play with your technique sheets, play with your tools, and send us some photos. We love to see what you guys are creating with the Studio 180 design products. Now, these should be available at your local shop, both the technique sheet and the tool. If they're not, just contact us directly and we'll get this into your hands as soon as possible. But thank you all for joining me, and I hope you have fun with your Checkerboard 60 techniques.